皆さん、こんばんはでしょうか。アメリカではもう。
Good evening, and also maybe 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning in the US or in the UK, maybe afternoon. So good evening and good afternoon. Now we'd like to start the symposium by GENSUIKIN. And first, we'd like to invite co-chair Mr. Kawano from the GENSUIKIN to give us a speech. I am Kawano, the co-chair of Japan Congress Against Atomic and Hydrogen Bombs, GENSUIKIN. I am an A-bomb survivor in Nagasaki. 77 years have passed since that day. Today, the average age of A-bomb survivor is 84, and I, who was 5 at the time, turned 82. A-bomb survivors from Hiroshima and Nagasaki who so hailed that day have been working on a campaign to abolish nuclear weapons, saying we should never repeat such a disaster 3 times. Nevertheless, development of nuclear weapons has been pushed forward, mainly by the great powers, and we are now living in an era when even human existence is threatened. Amid such circumstances, the TPNW, a Treaty on Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, was adopted by UN and it came into effect on January 22nd last year with the ratification by Honduras, a country in Central America. We, the A-bomb survivors and others who hoped for the abolition of nuclear weapons, jumped up and rejoiced at this feat. The other day, on January 22nd, 2022, a large number of people gathered at the Peace Memorial Park near the Center where the atomic bomb was dropped 77 years ago, and held a rally to commemorate the first anniversary of the treaties entering into force, and made a new vow to abolish nuclear weapons. On January 3rd this year, the leaders of the 5 nuclear weapon states declared their commitment to prevent a nuclear war and promote nuclear disarmament and negotiations. It was just before the NPT review conference was scheduled at the UN, and it seemed to me that the statement was intended by the 5 major powers as a makeshift measures, hoping to appease non-nuclear states and prevent a waiving of the current NPT framework by stipulating compliance with their obligation to negotiate the nuclear disarmament. I say this because it is a fact that the 5 major powers have been ignored and have not adhered to the NPT Article 6, even though this provision imposed nuclear powers a duty to conduct the nuclear disarmament negotiation in good faith. Moreover, even after TPNW came into effect, the UK, China have plainly announced that they will increase the amount of nuclear weapons, and the US and Russia are competing for a new development of usable nuclear weapons and deploying them on nuclear submarines. The NPT treaty, which has lacked the power of implementation, entered a new phase with enactment of TPNW, and the world was watching how the nuclear powers would respond. The response was given on January 3rd as a joint statement of the 5 nuclear weapon states on preventing nuclear war and the commitment to pursue nuclear disarmament negotiations. My question is that this statement really going to be accompanied by action in good faith? If it is not, without a doubt, a nuclear power will lose credibility and a decisive gap will be created. Now the world is at a major crossroads as to whether it is possible to bridge the gap between nuclear haves and haves not, and pursue a path to a world without nuclear weapons. The action of Japan, the only country that has been a victim of nuclear bombing in a war, are being tested. I believe this is a great opportunity for Japan to propose a world without nuclear weapons in an assertive way by participating first meeting of state parties of TPNW scheduled to be held in Vienna this year. It sure will be Japan acting as a bridge, which the Japanese government claims. Although time is limited, I would like to invite all of you to make positive suggestions from your standpoint. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kawano. So today, This is the International Symposium sponsored by GENSUIKIN, and this has been possible with the support of various organizations led by Mr. Kevin Martin of Peace Action, and then the former chair of the CND of the UK, Mr. Dave Webb. Thank you very much for your participation. And in Japan, last May, a new No Nukes Tokyo, which is a new organization, was born, and the co-representative Ms. Nakamura is here with us, and also the advisor of GENSUIKIN and the former mayor of city of Hiroshima, Mr. Tadatoshi Akiba is also with us. I would like to thank all of you. So 1 year has passed since the entry into force of the Treaty on the Prevention of Nuclear Weapons, but the things have not been moving very fast because of the COVID-19. The NPT review conference has been postponed, and we are not sure where to start in order to open up the very tightly closed lips of the nuclear weapon starts. And then we will have for another 2 hours, we will discuss linking between Japan, the US, and the UK, and we hope we can have a very useful discussion. And let me introduce myself. My name is Fujimoto. I'm the core chair of the GENSUIKIN, and I'm going to be the master of ceremony. And then, and today's symposium will also be posted later on the website. First, we would like to invite 4 speakers. First of all, Kevin Martin, the executive director of Peace Action, please.
Good morning, and thank you. The first year of the Biden administration saw the necessary extension of New START with Russia, but beyond that, very little progress toward nuclear disarmament. The time for action is now. If nuclear weapons are ever used again, a dangerous escalation is likely to follow. A nuclear winter could ensue, risking billions of casualties and a global environmental crisis. The Biden administration, supported by allies in Congress, should explicitly recommit to the vision of a nuclear weapons-free world President Obama articulated early in his presidency. The administration and Congress can back up this renewed commitment by dramatically reducing both spending on nuclear weapons and the salience of nuclear weapons in US security policy. Peace Action and our allies oppose the fear-mongering about China and also Russia that is driving or perhaps being used to excuse outdated nuclear policies and runaway spending on nuclear weapons. New nuclear weapons policies can be clarified in policy directives, including the upcoming nuclear posture review, though observers of that process are not hopeful for dramatic changes, and through reduced spending, though that was not achieved in 2021. The Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty Review Conference having been postponed again, and the first meeting of the states parties to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons will convene sometime in the next few months in Vienna. The joint statement by the permanent 5 members of the UN Security Council, prepared in advance of the NPT Review Conference, was cynical posturing unworthy of the paper it was written on. The P5 nuclear powers, the United States, Russia, China, UK, and France, and the other 4 nuclear states, Israel, India, Pakistan, and North Korea, are doing the exact opposite of the declarations in the statement by upgrading their nuclear arsenals, failing to engage in diplomacy toward the elimination of nuclear weapons the P5 are required to do by Article 6 of the NPT, and opposing the TPNW, the Treaty to Ban Nuclear Weapons. One might say it was significant that P5 thought they had to put out such nonsense in their statement to try to fend off criticism of their dismal actions, but they shouldn't have bothered to insult the world's intelligence. We expect the TPNW conference to conclude with a far more uplifting, inspiring outcome, with states, parties, and NGO supporters showing leadership toward the nuclear weapons-free world we desperately need to help achieve real security on a planet rife with fear, conflict, injustice, and environmental catastrophe. Two other issues the Biden administration has not moved rapidly enough on are restoring the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or JCPOA, the anti-nuclear deal with Iran, and diplomacy toward peace on the Korean Peninsula. On Iran, it looks likely that at least some kind of agreement can be achieved in the first half of this year, though restoring the agreement should have occurred early last year, and the failure to do so has complicated matters. Peace Action and a coalition of organizations in the United States will be lobbying Congress and the administration and pressing our pro-peace and diplomacy demands in the media and on social media. While perhaps not stressed enough, diplomacy with Iran is politically popular, as US voters want nothing to do with another disastrous war of choice in the Middle East. Korea diplomacy has unfortunately taken a back seat to other issues, both domestic and global. It is certainly hoped an end of war declaration can be concluded before South Korean President Moon Jae-in leaves office, but the question is, will North Korea even pay any attention? If not, is the symbolism worthwhile, even as the US and South Korea maintain a menacing military posture toward the North? There's a growing constituency of politically active Korean Americans demanding peace and diplomacy, and I have been privileged to participate in that growth as coordinator of the Korea Peace Network since 2017 as part of my work with Peace Action. We will have our 6th annual lobby days this spring and hope to have it be the largest yet. It has grown every year with over 200 citizen activists lobbying Congress on Korea last year. While our work remains cut out for us, Peace Action has an ambitious campaign plan this year to advance nuclear disarmament. Some of the highlights will include, of course, working towards the long-term goal of complete global elimination of all nuclear weapons and US cooperation and leadership to make that happen. Medium-term goals include progress on command control of nuclear weapons, ending hair trigger alert status, promoting no first use, ending sole authority for a president to initiate nuclear war. We will work to cut the top line expenditures on nuclear weapons and the escalatory $1.7 trillion for the nuclear weapons upgrade, working to block or reverse any increases in that funding. Promoting the elimination of the ground-based missile leg of the nuclear triad, and in the interim, postponing the planned $100 billion ground-based strategic deterrent replacement of the ICBM leg. Block funding and deployment for new and quote-unquote more usable nuclear weapons, such as the relatively low-yield nuclear weapons for the ground and submarine-launched cruise missiles and the long-range standoff missile. Supporting stockpile reductions with Russia through negotiated agreement or parallel unilateral actions. And certainly the crisis over Ukraine provides a great opportunity for an off-ramp if we would agree to cut nuclear weapons on both sides. US should engage in arms control diplomacy with China and Russia to avoid a prolonged new arms race. Blocking Star Wars missile defense programs and nuclear weapons in space. United States signing on to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, or launching a new disarmament convention or diplomatic process. Impact the nuclear posture review or other nuclear policy changes in the direction of the policies above. In terms of our more concrete campaign outputs, Peace Action will garner support in Congress for the adoption of a no first use policy, opposing the 1.7 trillion nuclear escalation, supports for cuts or elimination of programs, including the most dangerous, especially the money pit missile, also known as the ground-based strategic deterrent, Supporting cuts to the nuclear weapons budget, including by budget hawk Republicans. There are some that might agree to cut nuclear weapons because of the cost. And of course, as I said before, support for negotiations with Russia and China to reduce nuclear weapons stockpiles. In this regard, statements or letters from members of Congress are very important. Again, cutting the funding for nuclear weapons. Expressing concern over the current command and control policies, letters or statements pressuring the Biden administration to adopt a no first use policy. There have been some good statements on that by members of Congress. Letters or statements to the Biden administration urging that the United States step up about meeting NPT obligations, including elimination of funding for the ground launched cruise missile. Letters or statements pushing the Biden administration for nuclear negotiations with Russia and China, getting more congressional champions to counter the political analysis that seeks to foster a new Cold War with China and Russia, and it sets the record straight on developments related to China and Russia. Support for treaties, including the NPT and also Open Skies Treaty, and of course the Nuclear Weapons Ban Treaty, and also an issue that doesn't get a lot of attention, but opposing cuts for the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty Organization's funding. We're looking for actions and statements from the Biden administration, obviously, on adopting a no first use policy or other changes to declaratory policy, rejoining the Iran nuclear deal, the upcoming new nuclear posture review, hopefully reflecting disarmament goals or other administration policies, scaling back the 1.7 trillion nuclear escalation, upholding of US obligation to nuclear weapons treaties, seeking support again for stockpile reductions with Russia, bilateral discussions with Russia on possible negotiations or unilateral reductions in nuclear weapons. Both sides can do that. You don't have to have a treaty to do it. It's been done before. Bilateral discussions with China on possible negotiations or unilateral reductions. Increased public support, which would mean any support at all because they haven't been, for the Nuclear Weapons Ban Treaty. Visible US political support for the TPNW from elected officials, opinion leaders, community leaders, and grassroots leaders. State, local, church, and labor resolutions on back from the brink, various policies to reduce the nuclear weapons danger. And there is a growing Senate and House working group focused on disarmament, non-proliferation, and prevention of nuclear war issues, which is very important, and we're looking to increase that. In terms of our key campaign activities for peace action, our grassroots network will work with US and international allies on events around the TPNW meeting. Of course, we don't know when that will be. It was supposed to have been in March, but it will be held sometime later, hopefully in the spring. Our grassroots actions will include petitions and online actions focused on cutting the $100 billion ground-based strategic deterrent, land-based leg of the nuclear triad, as it's both a dangerous risk of accidental nuclear war and a wasteful theft of money needed for human needs. Of course, participating in Hiroshima and Nagasaki commemorations in the United States, and also maybe possibly in Japan if the pandemic permits that kind of travel. Responding to the nuclear posture review, which could come out anytime. It's expected this month. And we expect, unfortunately, it will fail to rethink nuclear weapons, and we'll protest that and ask the administration to take subsequent actions to reduce the salience of nuclear weapons. Peace action is somewhat unique in our election-related work. We do actually endorse candidates for House and Senate. We promote our policy platform. We use candidate questionnaires and briefings, bird dogging, which is publicly asking questions in open forums of candidates, and other forms of voter and candidate education and engagement. And lastly, local actions, state level legislation, or even more local, sometimes the county or city, to have resolutions on no first use of nuclear weapons, the back from the brink policies, and the Nuclear Weapons Ban Treaty. This is, of course, an ambitious set of goals and actions, and Peace Action appreciates the partnerships we have with GENSUIKIN, CND, and so many other terrific organizations around the globe. Arigatou gozaimashita.
ケビン、ありがとうございました。
Kevin-san, thank you very much indeed. So thank you very much for giving us a various insight. Maybe all these insights cannot be covered for the next 2 hours, but later we'd like to hear more from you. And now we'd like to invite Mr. David Webb, but could you please give us some time? We'd like to double check the technical programs with interpretation. So David-san, could you please hold and wait a little bit? I will give you a sign to start later.
Okay, fine.
通訳さん、すいません。ちょっとチャットの方を確認してもらえますか。
あ、菊池さん、すいません。
Check the YouTube for English and Japanese channel. So we would like to ask David-san to deliver his speech.
Okay, thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here with you today. I'm David Webb. I was chair of the UK campaign for nuclear disarmament for about 10 years, but I stepped down this year to remain a member of the CND Council. CND has campaigned non-violently for 64 years to achieve British nuclear disarmament. However, we also recognise that Britain's nuclear weapons are only a small part of the problem. So we also work with anti-nuclear groups in other countries to eliminate the global threat. We're also working to end Britain's participation in the US missile defence system and with other campaigns internationally against missile defence and weapons in space. Our other campaigns include opposition to NATO and its nuclear policies and to nuclear power, and for the prevention and cessation of wars in which nuclear weapons may be used, as well as encouraging non-military solutions to conflict. CND is also present at the United Nations and other international disarmament conferences and is funded entirely by its members and supporters. Our policies are decided upon by our annual National Members Conference, where our national leadership is also elected. We are a proud grassroots movement comprising local groups, regions and nations, as well as specialist sections. And CND works with an alliance of anti-nuclear organizations, trade unions, and faith communities to achieve our goal of a nuclear weapons-free world. We aim to change government policies to bring about the elimination of British nuclear weapons as a major contribution to global abolition, to stimulate wide public debate on the need for alternatives, both to the nuclear cycle and to military attempts to resolve conflict, to empower people to engage actively in the political process and to work for a nuclear-free and peaceful future, and to cooperate with other groups in the UK and internationally to ensure the development of greater mutual security. The joint statement of the leaders of the 5 nuclear weapon states on preventing nuclear war and avoiding arms races was not really something that we took a great deal of notice of. We recognize it as a cynical attempt to kind of introduce the new NPT discussions. So we had no faith in its message, to be quite honest. And we have seen no action, no further action on this statement ever since. For over 40 years, scientists have warned that even a so-called limited nuclear exchange would result in sudden global freezing, weather disruption, and a devastating global famine, killing billions of people. But nuclear weapon states are not taking steps to prevent a nuclear holocaust. We are working to bring together the existing campaigns to reduce military spending, prevent climate change, protect the environment, provide for more for people's needs. All of these issues are linked, and we need to work together to show how it is the structures of our societies that must be changed if we are to survive. Like most people around the world, we celebrated in January last year when the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons came into force, a treaty created and developed by people like us. As you will know, however, the UK government has opposed the treaty from the very beginning, and so we are working to create support for it through our National Ban Communities campaign. The object of this campaign is to collect pledges of support for the TPNW from MPs, local politicians, and faith leaders. In addition, we're encouraging local councils to pass supportive resolutions, and we are strongly urging our government to sign and ratify the TPNW, or at the very least to send observers to the first meeting of state parties to the treaty. But with this present government, this doesn't look particularly likely. We're also working on trying to remove investment for nuclear weapons from banks and pension funds. They already invest considerable amounts of money into nuclear weapons via their companies that they support and the programs that are produced by the companies. This has been fairly successful so far, but we need a lot more work on doing this kind of work. Following the removal of the UK from the European Union, Prime Minister Boris Johnson has been trying to create an image of a global Britain playing an international role. But rather than have the UK take part in diplomatic moves to settle differences and bring people together, he has been following the military activities of the US and sent warships into the Black Sea and the South China Sea, provoking Russia and China and creating unwarranted international incidents. He is in quite a lot of trouble at the moment in the UK. His government and his own popularity have dropped considerably following all kinds of activities during the COVID lockdown period. But instead of owning up to this and even resigning, Boris Johnson has used the threat of war in the Ukraine to distract from the implosion of his premiership. In the last few years, his government has also increased military spending by £24 billion, the largest percentage rise in almost 70 years. The cap on the number of UK nuclear warheads has also been raised from 180 to 260, a massive increase of 44%, ending 30 years of gradual reductions in the UK nuclear arsenal. This increase in nuclear warheads is in direct violation of the NPT, which the UK signed in 1968, and CND has reported this breach to the NPT Review Conference to be considered when it eventually gets to meet. The recent controversial AUKUS deal, in which the UK and US are due to share nuclear-powered submarine technologies with Australia, is another serious breach of the NPT and is generating anger and mistrust and raising tensions in the Indo-Pacific region. All this is happening at a time when cooperation and goodwill between all nations is urgently needed to deal with the climate emergency. The UK government also grossly mismanaged the COVID pandemic, dealing out lucrative contracts to its friends and supporters, but causing a great deal of suffering and thousands of needless deaths to British citizens. Unfortunately, the leadership of the Labour Party, the main political opposition, is ineffective, and they have also issued aggressive statements against Russia and China and supported military spending increases. They continue to support the Trident nuclear weapons system and its replacement, even though the majority of party members strongly support nuclear disarmament. A recent poll shows that 77% of the British public support a global ban on nuclear weapons, and 59% support the UK joining the TPNW. And we know that 75% of Japanese people support the treaty and that support for the TPNW continues to grow. It's important that we remind people of what nuclear weapons are and what they do. The testimonies of those who have suffered from their use and testing is central to the global campaign. Nuclear war would devastate the planet and destroy all life. We will continue to work alongside you and alongside peace action in the US and many others and many other international groups to build a powerful international movement against militarism and for a peaceful and sustainable world. Thank you very much.
ありがとうございました。
Thank you very much. So he shared with us about the situation of the UK moves, as well as the activities together with the US, which has a lot of commonalities with those of Japan. And we hope that we can discuss those issues later in the discussion part. Next is Ms. Nakamura from No Nukes Tokyo. So she's going to share her screen, right? Okay.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me here today. And it is my pleasure to have a chance to talk about my activity and me as an activist from Japan. First, please let me introduce about myself a little bit more. I was born and raised in Nagasaki and came to Tokyo when I entered the university. Because my grandmother is a hibakusha, a victim of atomic bomb, I've seen this nuclear issue as a personal problem since when I was little. I started to join the peace activities when I became a high school student and met many activists, including hibakusha, who knew the painfulness and sufferings of others than anybody else, and also who have led the movement so far. They were so warm, and the encounter with them was a very important opportunity for me to shape my own identity, which I have today. After coming to Tokyo, outside of a bombed area, I found out that the society was not that into nuclear issue compared to people living in Hiroshima or Nagasaki. People seem to think they have nothing to do with the issue and felt a huge sense of crisis. Until then, I felt a priority to talk this issue as a third generation of hibakusha, but I realized it was wrong. Now, everyone in this world is living with 13,000 nuclear weapons, and everyone is involved to it. We all need to talk and think about it together. Therefore, I launched No Nukes Tokyo to make a place to make an action in Tokyo. We put 3 meanings in the name. First, no nukes. Second, no nukes, which means to learn the nuclear issue we have today together. And third, no new. We wanted to create and design a new solution for this issue as our job. In Japan, it is still difficult for us to have a job by conducting peace activities. So many members had no choice to leave the activity when they graduate from school. However, it is necessary to have a much longer term to think and work if we really try to solve the issue. So we decided to do it. Until now, for over 8 months after we've launched No Nukes Tokyo, thanks to a lot of support, we have done so many activities like meeting politicians, submitting proposal to Japanese Ministry of Foreign Affairs, or managing events, and so on. I'll talk about our activities later. Now, as we discussed before, the international situation concerning to nuclear weapons are in danger. In 2020, $72.6 billion were used to nuclear industry, despite the world was suffering to pandemic of COVID-19. If this money was used for medical, how many people could be saved? Nuclear weapons are a threat for us, even if it's not used. I have been wondering for a long time, but why nuclear weapons, which destroyed my hometown 76 years ago, could be a hero to save our lives? In this globalized world, no matter where the nuclear weapons are used, all of us cannot avoid its damage or impact. And the point is, we cannot fully manage these nuclear weapons. This fact increases the risks of nuclear weapons of accidentally used or quick individual decision of politicians or terrorism attack, and so on. The discussion of nuclear disarmament among nuclear weapon states focuses on the power balance of international politics and never talk about each of our life. Without talking of the best thing needs to be protected, I can figure out what they are really trying to save. TPNW is the exact international framework trying to put our citizen point of view into the discussion of security. The treaty emphasizes the inhumanitarian effect of nuclear weapons because of knowing and understanding the painful and suffering experiences of hibakusha. It makes a big difference whether we talk on the premise that nuclear weapons are absolutely evil or not. The treaty has not only the legal binding, but also keep giving international society a message to abolish nuclear weapons. A substantial discussion on the abolition of nuclear weapons is expected. Japan, the only A-bomb country in the world, is thought to be in the positive side of this treaty, but Japanese government keeps negative attitude, which make me mad and frustrating. According to public opinion poll researched by Tokyo Shimbun, 70% of Japanese citizens answered Japan to join the treaty, and 85% required to attend the first meeting of state parties. However, only 34% of DIET members agree with the treaty. 34% of DIET members agree with the treaty, and rate of positive opinion of MSB remains to 50%. Here, we can see the breakup of the opinion among governors and civil society. This research of DIET members was done by Green Watch, one of our projects. But the thing is that we cannot receive enough response to our questionnaires of DIET members, because most of them doesn't have a clear stance to this complicated issue and do not give an individual position or opinion in accordance with the policy of the political party to which they belong. But if this continues, the discussion doesn't move forward. Watching this situation, we decided to meet and ask DIET members directly how they think about it. Until now, we have applied for visits to more than 40 people, mainly elected from Tokyo. Currently, we met 6 DIET members, 1 office, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The main questions we ask are these 4. By asking these questions, we are trying to think and figure out together the way for Japan to become a leader of the world to abolish nuclear weapons. These kind of communication with the politicians are still not popular, but I'm sure that this is necessary and important role as a citizen. In addition, the information we gather through this project could be a big factor for voters to make decisions during the elections. By having conversation directly with them, we realize that they are conscious about nations and alliances when they talk about security or nuclear disarmament. And they repeat, it is essential. The main reason of taking negative position with TPNW is the nuclear deterrence, and they repeat it is essential to protect national property and lives. But is it really an effective step? On the other hand, this means they are willing to use nuclear weapons in case if national property and lives face in danger. If so, we are going to be perpetrator. This cannot be happen and is not ethically permissible as an A-bomb country. As I said before, the existence of individual lives have been fallen out of the discussion. If the nuclear weapons were used in real, how the international society will handle and take care of it? Who will take the responsibility? Though they are thinking nuclear deterrence on the premise of using nuclear weapons, they do not have abilities of crisis management for the risks of nuclear weapons. They insist the abolition of nuclear weapons, but never presented a concrete plan to abolish it. But if we keep asking to them, they will take this issue more seriously and start thinking much harder. And sometimes something could be changed. Here, Mr. Kaeda from the Constitutional Democratic Party of Japan, one of the DOT members we met, answered there is nothing he have done for the abolition of nuclear weapons at the time. But in an election done after we met him, he asked to join the MSP to his election pledge on the top. It was a moment to believe we have a power to change the politics. We also submitted the proposal to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. These are the 5 things we demand government to do. First, fulfill the responsibility. We demand the politicians that has created Japan's national security policies today to heed Hibakusha's critical voices. Second, present concrete plans. We call on the Japanese government to clearly present a roadmap to abolish nuclear weapons. Third, explain fully and respectfully. The explanation about the nuclear policy by the government is extremely insufficient and insincere. The government should be accountable for its decision-making so that the public can be convinced. Fourth, recognize the treaty. TPNW was adopted against the backdrop of the apparent limitations of the NPT. Japan has to perceive today's world trend calmly and should make a position on this issue clear. And fifth, join the treaty. Japan's absence to the treaty could give an international society a wrong message that justifies the existence of nuclear weapons. To keep up with the global movement, Japan needs to join the treaty as soon as possible. We submitted this proposal on September 26th, on the International Day of the Total Elimination of Nuclear Weapons, and we had a great response. Now we are having role as a spokesman of the society. There are many things that we can do. At the same time, it will soon be 77 years after the atomic bombs were dropped in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and we are facing the problem of aging of Hibakusha. I heard the news that some of them have passed away last year. We do not have much time to listen to Hibakusha's voice in the future. In order to spend time together with Hibakusha, we are holding testimony sessions online as well. Up until now, the testimony sessions were mainly done with lecture type, but by having it online, we realized that Hibakusha and participants get much closer than before. I guess the participants could feel that they are talking with Hibakusha one by one through the screen. Thanks to this, it gets easier to share Hibakusha's individual experiences with a lot of sympathy. This is very important because their stories are not a parallel world story. Hibakusha always gives us a message that what we are really trying to protect. I think it is our responsibility to spread their words as a young generation of Japan. I have introduced some of our activities so far. Now we have 7 members in NUKES Tokyo, and all of them are enjoying these activities. Of course, they took this issue seriously, but the encounter and feeling of being a part of the society makes us feel confidence, which is nothing special to do so. Also, raising voice should not be a pain for someone. There are so many global issues in the world, as well as in our daily life. We can find out the issue of gender or discrimination and so on. Maybe the world will not be safe and peace, even though if we abolish all nuclear weapons in the world. But we will keep moving forward to realize a nuclear-free world with full of kindness and empathy to painful and sufferings of others. I'm pretty sure that we can do this. Thank you for listening.
ありがとうございました。
Thank you very much. So at the beginning, I misspoke about your name. So your name is Suzuka-san. So last but not least, we'd like to invite Mr. Akiba to give us a speech. Mr. Akiba, are you ready? So could you please share the screen?
すみません、こっちからは画面が入れないんですけど、ビデオの開始ができません。
I cannot start my video from my side.
大丈夫？
入りましたかね。
秋葉さん、カメラ切り替えていただけます？あれ？
いや、だから切り替えてるんですけど、
そうですね。
So I'm trying to switching my screen. However, my background is weird.
まあ
すみません、もう一回退出してもらって入れば。
Could you please exit and once again, could you please rejoin us? I'm so sorry I'm taking up too much time.
Ah, 入れましたね。
Now I am joining again. Thank you very much. So could you please start your speech?
そうですね。画面共有。クリックして、アニメーションを使ってるんで、できたら。
So I am using animation function. Could you please make it a slideshow so that you can see all these slides as one? Could you please press the left button? So it's just the second page, but anyway.
Mr. Yasunari Fujimoto, co-chair of GENSUIKIN and today's moderator. Mr. Kevin Martin, president of Peace Action. Mr. Dave Webb, chair of Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament UK. Suzuka Nakamura, a member or representative of No NUKES. I'm sorry that I did not put your name on Ms. Nakamura's name since I did not change this list after I received the names initially. I'm sorry, but anyway, I've added it verbally. And fellow peace workers, it is my pleasure and honor to join you to discuss what we should be doing as we welcome the first meeting of states parties to the TPNW in Vienna to be held soon. Today, I'd like to pay particular attention to what the Japanese government and civil society, including local governments, should be doing to welcome the first meeting of states parties. It is a continuation of my proposal last summer with new viewpoints that I hope clarify the future direction. I need to emphasize that my proposal is exactly what the Japanese government should be doing if it's claimed that it wants to be the bridge between the nuclear weapon states and non-nuclear weapon states is sincere. Sorry, the slide is ahead of me. Because of our overwhelming success, 5 nuclear weapon states, NWS, the US, Russia, the UK, China, and France, had to issue a joint statement on January 3rd this year, partially as an excuse for the refusal to ratify the TPNW. As Mr. Fujimoto summarized the essential points of the joint statement, I'd like to focus on the most relevant one. And the point that they made is that the 5 countries reaffirmed that none of their nuclear weapons are targeted at each other or any other state. Secretary General Antonio Guterres welcomed the joint statement, but in the end, he emphasized that the only way to eliminate all nuclear risks is to eliminate all nuclear weapons. One question that comes to our mind is why did the 5 nuclear weapon states issue such a statement now? The answer becomes clear when we look back at the advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice, ICJ, in 1996. Its most significant ruling was that the threat or use of nuclear weapons would generally be contrary to the rules of international law applicable in armed conflict, and in particular, the principles and rules of humanitarian law. However, right after this clause, ICJ also stated that the court cannot conclude definitively, ちょっと前に行き過ぎてます。However, right after this clause, ICJ also stated that, I quote, the court cannot conclude definitively whether the threat or use of nuclear weapons would be lawful or unlawful in an extreme circumstance of self-defense, in which the very survival of a state would be at stake, the end of quote. Nuclear weapon states interpreted this clause as a permit to use nuclear weapons if the survival of a state is at stake. And this gap that ICJ allowed to exist is precisely what the TPNW was meant to fill. Now that the TPNW is in force, ちょっとこれ2枚ぐらい前に行っちゃってます。少し戻してください。Now that the TPNW is in force, nuclear weapon states needed to reaffirm their pre-TPNW stance by the joint statement. In principle, nuclear weapons are not targeted at each other or against other states per se. However, if the survival of a state is at stake, anything and everything goes. We need to change the 1996 mentality of the nuclear weapon states and nuclear dependent countries to fit the present legal framework of the world. To accomplish this goal, I propose 2 ingredients. One is to widen our vista to include past partial successes on which to build future successes. The other is to lower the hurdle for the nuclear weapon states to make it easier for them to start a journey toward ratifying the TPNW. 次行ってください。In an oversimplified story, the TPNW was successful because the effort toward it replicated and improved upon the success of the World Court project that had made it possible for ICJ to issue the advisory opinion in 1996. If we broaden our horizon by including partial successes, many possibilities emerge. For example, one of the two partial successes I have in mind is the existence of nuclear weapon-free NWF municipalities worldwide, and such zones created by international treaties. The second partial success is the no first use policy. More will follow on the second partial success later. To eliminate all nuclear weapons, all we need to do is to make every municipality in every country nuclear weapon free. One exemplary effort in this direction culminated in the independence referendum of Scotland in 2014. If Scotland had gained independence, it would have become a nuclear weapon-free state. The reason is that all municipalities of Scotland have declared themselves nuclear weapon-free. The second ingredient is to lower the first hurdle that nuclear weapon states must clear before ratifying the TPNW. Even if leaders of nuclear weapon states should be awakened all of a sudden to the truth that nuclear weapons must go soon, the hurdle of ratifying the TPNW could be too high. Perhaps it is easier for them to clear a more accessible stepping stone before fully committing to ratifying the TPNW. One candidate for the stepping stone is no first use. The second partial success, as we saw, we have a good chance of making it the full success by persuading the relevant countries, because critical nations have already taken some positive steps or declared a partial agreement to the idea. 次お願いします。はい。クリックしてください。First, China has adopted the no first use policy since it first acquired nuclear weapons. Second, the US took concrete actions under the Obama administration to make the UN adopt the no first use policy and legislate the no first use policy domestically. 次お願いします。Unfortunately, staunch opposition from the Abe administration of Japan thwarted such a move. Third, 次お願いします。Nuclear weapon-free zones treaties have already succeeded in having nuclear weapon states adopt no first use, albeit within limited geographical regions. 次お願いします。For example, the Tlatelolco Treaty covering Latin America and the Caribbean stipulates that those countries in the area will not possess nuclear weapons. 次お願いします。The 5 nuclear weapon states also promised not to attack this group with nuclear weapons. This condition is called the Negative Security Assurance, or NSA. Although all 5 nuclear weapon states ratified only this treaty and no other NWF zone treaties, the significance is that nuclear weapon states did agree to the idea of no first use. The concept of no first use has the potential to spread. To expand the no first use zones globally and incentivize nuclear weapon states to adopt the no first use policies, 次お願いします。We should focus on 2 geographical areas of strategic importance that will have a far-reaching impact on the future. The first is Northeast Asia and the other is Europe. 次お願いします。Let us look at Northeast Asia. The 6 parties involved in this idea are the 3 core countries: Japan, Democratic People's Republic of Korea, 次お願いします。The Republic of Korea and the 3 other countries, the US, China, and Russia. The Northeast Asian Nuclear Weapon-Free Treaty, if it succeeds, 次お願いします, stipulates that the 3 core countries agree to become or stay nuclear weapon-free, and the outer 3 countries guarantee NSA to the 3 core countries. 次お願いします。The burden would be on DPRK, Russia, and the US. Japan and ROK do not possess nuclear weapons. China has adhered to the no first use policy for some time. DPRK will have to renounce its nuclear arsenals, and both Russia and the US will have to guarantee NSA in this region. 次お願いします。 A no first use policy is more negotiable for Russia and the US than an outright renunciation of all nuclear weapons. And within the US, there is a large enough political force that endorses the no first use idea. DPRK must make the toughest concession, but the six-country agreement would also assure its continued existence in the international framework. If Northeast Asia Nuclear Weapon-Free Zone Treaty becomes a reality, Russia will give NSA to Northeast Asia. That means that Russia adopts the no first use policy within Northeast Asia. To convince Russia that NSA to Europe is beneficial to the country, the European Nuclear Weapon-Free Zone Treaty will be effective. If there is no threat to Russia from Europe, Russia will not need to target Europe with its nuclear weapons. These are crude and oversimplified ideas disregarding the geopolitical consideration or strategic analysis. However, if we succeed in sandwiching Russia with non-threatening nuclear weapon-free zones, we will see a future with hope. 次お願いします。To make the nuclear weapon-free states adopt the no first use policy, I believe that the critical player is China. It is only nuclear weapon states that has declared and adhered to the no first use policy. For some no first use policy for over half a century. For some strange reason, we have not valued this aspect of China so far. Yes, China is causing many significant problems for all of us, but when it comes to solving the global warming issue, China must be part of our efforts and it has promised to play its role. When we tackle another existential problem of humanity, and when China has led the world in adopting the no first use policy, why can't we ask China to play a leading role in guaranteeing the world's future? 次お願いします。China's influence on DPRK is crucial when negotiations are in progress. If the US becomes committed to no first use, as President Obama tried, China and the US will be able to persuade Russia, the UK, and France to form the European Nuclear Weapon-Free Zone Treaty. 次お願いします。Unfortunately, we cannot expect Japan to do much under Kishida, who represents the Hiroshima Hibakusha and citizens, but betrayed them by initially refusing to sign the 2013 humanitarian pledge. In October, he changed his mind after massive criticisms from Nagasaki Mayor Taue and other civil society organizations and individuals. However, he refused to sign the Austrian pledge in 2015, another indication that he respects the US and the Foreign Ministry's thinking more than the Hibakusha's experiences and messages. 次お願いします。元に戻してください。1枚戻して。Ironically, いや、次です。先に行き過ぎた。ちょっと先に行き過ぎちゃってます。何枚か戻してください。ここ。Ironically, the Kishida administration is popular among the public despite such blatant disregard of the wishes of the majority of the people in Japan. 次。A time like this is when civil society can and should work energetically to drive home the point that the government works for the people. We need to re-educate the public that we are the boss. Perhaps if I use a popular expression recently, we should educate the public that we are the big boss. We also need to review the present state of the peace movement to reorganize and to reinvigorate the movement. The number of hibakusha is declining. Trade unions that have been the solid base of the movement seem to be reassessing their priorities. And the Japanese peace movement that traditionally made outstanding contributions internationally now must work inside Japan to persuade the government to ratify the TPNW. We need to attract younger generation to rejuvenate the peace movement to succeed in them. And now is an excellent time, to openly discuss these matters throughout Japan because of the House of Councillors election this summer. I expect that GENSUIKIN will initiate and lead this new and all-out national movement. In conclusion, let me wrap up the whole idea in a package. Let me call it the 2040 vision. Its ultimate goal is to eliminate all nuclear weapons by 2040. The interim goal is to have no first use adopted by 2030. 次お願いします。これが2つのゴール。This is the ultimate goal and the intimate goal. 次お願いします。Please remember that the 2020 vision by Mayors for Peace had an interim goal of having the TPNW adopted by the UN by 2015. It became a reality in 2017. If we continue the path of success, we can expect to celebrate the no first use policy adopted by nuclear weapon states in 10 years or so, around 2030. 次お願いします。Let us work toward this goal and the ultimate one of abolition of nuclear weapons by 2040. With determination, we can succeed. Thank you very much.
Akiba さん、ありがとうございました。
Thank you very much, Mr. Akiba. And his presentation included some very two major proposals as well as on other issues on detailed aspects. He, in his last part of presentation, he called for revisionation of the movement, and we feel that within the GENSUIKIN movement, maybe I'm the younger one within our movement. But we have Nakamura Suzuka-san with us today, and she is one of those young people who has started and is starting a new movement. But as Nakamura-san said, among the younger generation, they are not very much interested in this kind of issue. So that's why I would like to ask this question to Nakamura-san first. So you felt you had this sense of urgency or crisis because there is this definite difference between Hiroshima and Nagasaki and other parts of Japan, or is that a generational thing, generational gap, or is it because the young people do not know about Hiroshima and Nagasaki? So that's a question for Nakamura-san. And you also mentioned that there is a gap between people and politician. Is it because the politicians, although having a recognition about the importance of the abolition of nuclear weapons, but they still think that the nuclear deterrence is important, and they are still stuck with that theory? Or is it because the politicians do not really know about this issue?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. I think for the first question, like the differences between Hiroshima or Nagasaki, or the gap between the generation, I think it's both. Like for me, after coming to Tokyo, I met friends of LGBTQ. Until then, I never have attention or interest on the issue of gender. I think it's very natural for people living outside of Hiroshima or Nagasaki to not have so much conscious as me about this issue. But so I don't think that's a bad thing, or I will not shame them, but I do have a very big conscience about not knowing about what happens when the nuclear weapons are used. Nuclear weapons and also the logic of nuclear deterrence were born during the era of World War II or Cold War. It's over 77 years have passed already, and we need to get rid out of this way of thinking. Like I do not want to be hibakusha, and also I do not want my friends and family to be a victim of nuclear weapons. And I never heard a kind of this story and voices from the point of humanitarian in the discussion of diet. Like the politicians tend to speak this issue from in the international politics, but I think the thing is the most important thing when we talk about this issue is the humanitarian point of view. So you know, I said that there's a big gap between civil society and politicians, but I think that this should not happen. Like all of us should not be a victim, and all of us should think this issue from the humanitarian point of view. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. And then Ms. Iwamatsu-san, who was long been a president of GENSUIKIN, died recently, and he always talked about the humanity, and he had the intelligence which is nurtured through this humanism and humanity, and such words we don't hear from the politicians right now. And now, Akiba-san, do you have some thoughts about what he said?
He's raising his hand. Perhaps he has something in that direction first. So maybe Kevin should address it first. Then I'll follow after Kevin.
Okay, sorry, Kevin. I didn't recognize you raised your hand. Please.
That's okay. Just very briefly, I agree with the last two comments, and I think we should, discuss Mayor Akiba's, proposal for a campaign through 2040. But I also want to remind us that on our last time we had an international gathering like this, Mayor Akiba proposed a series of webinars or educational forms and materials to address some of the most important misconceptions or wrong ideas about nuclear weapons, and deterrence theory was one that he recommended. And I would be glad to contribute to a webinar, or if it's a series of writing about that, because in the United States anyway, if you just say deterrence, it's like a magic word, like, oh, deterrence, that's why we need nuclear weapons. And there's really no thinking behind it. And it does deny the humanity and the humanitarian reality of what deterrence theory means. If you unpack the word just a little, I don't think it stands up to much scrutiny.
Right.
What deterrence really means is, my country is willing to incinerate the civilians of another country. That's what deterrence theory really means in order to supposedly protect our country. So I'm just remembering Mayor Akiba's proposal on that from before, and I hope we take it up going forward.
Thank you very much, Mr. Akiba.
Thank you very much, Kevin, for remembering my proposal. Yes, I think we should seriously tackle that problem with younger people participating, I believe that just that we can go forward very, very enthusiastically this time. And also, there's another point I have been trying to incorporate into my presentation this time, but I haven't had the time to develop it or present it now. But as a countermeasure to the deterrence theory, which is based on the world model of nation-to-nation relationship as an adversarial one, or one of power struggle. But I believe that we can probably change the world's public view so that we start advocating the international relationship as a sort of moral battle. Well, battle is not really a good word, but moral competition, in which each country tries to sort of one up the other country by presenting a higher moral ground, rather than the deterrence theory, kind of thinking where each country is trying to go sort of worse in terms of moral judgment. And, I believe many people probably will see the superiority of thinking in that terms, but somebody really has to start sort of directing the flow of the world's opinion, and also the comparison criterion of nation or among nation in that direction. So I really would like to pick up on a reminder that we should have a webinar or something on the deterrence theory after I develop the idea. Right now I am writing a couple of articles for American magazines with my good friend, and I believe that will be a good sort of basis for forming a webinar of that kind. And can I just add one thing about young people and politicians and the time and space? First of all, time and space are interchangeable. What happens, along the timeline also happens in geographical terms, okay, how far or how near and so forth. So that's kind of a mathematical idea, but in reality, that helps to sharpen your thinking as well. And as Mr. Fujimoto mentioned, politicians, especially Japanese politicians, as we see them more closely, seem to be forgetting the humanness in politics. As Nakamura-san said, politics must be based on each individual's happiness or thriving or whatever. Of human existence. And as Nakamura-san mentioned, I think we should restore it in many different ways. But through elections, and especially this summer, since there'll be an election, there'll be a very important election, I think we should, and I hope GENSUIKIN will take up the issue and make a national campaign somehow. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you very much, Mr. Akiba. I agree with you. And now we'd like to turn to Mr. David Webb. So Mr. Akiba talked about a nuclear-free zone like Scotland. Well, the municipality in Scotland, they are against the nuclear weapons. So Trident, which will be mounted to the submarine, and that is located in Scotland. So I think there are some controversy in the UK, and how is this perceived by a younger generation in Scotland? So could you talk about this, David-san?
Yes, certainly. Thank you for the question. It's certainly true that the vast majority of Scottish people do not want nuclear weapons in their country. And should Scotland become independent, there's every chance that they would have to be removed. We still don't know, of course, what might happen under any kind of negotiations with the British government or what's left of the British government, but it seems very unlikely that in the current kind of climate that an independent Scotland would allow nuclear weapons to be based there. And the problem then for the remaining UK government, if UK is the right term to use then, is that there's nowhere else for them to go. There's no other place around the coast of the UK currently that would be suitable for hosting these nuclear submarines. They're very large, and they try to avoid putting them anywhere near large population centers or anything like that. So I think a survey has shown there's no real other place for them to go. So it could be a very difficult problem for a forthcoming British government. I think it was very exciting to see the development of the anti-nuclear movement in Scotland. It came not exactly from nowhere, but it really developed very fast. And also a lot of young people were involved, that's quite right. But I think that's the same for the TPNW, the campaign to bring in the TPNW. That also focused on humanitarian issues, which we've been discussing up till now. That also brought in a lot of young people. And I think young people appreciate and understand the humanity of, or the inhumanity of nuclear weapons, and how it's so important for them, for their generation, and for future generations that should be considered. So I think that's one of the exciting parts of things. At the moment, in the rest of the UK, there is not a huge amount of discussion, to be honest, about nuclear weapons. The opposition parties, except for the Green Party, all have pro-nuclear weapon policies. And it doesn't look so good. The previous leader of the Labour Party, as you know, was very adamant against nuclear weapons, but he wasn't really allowed to speak out about that issue within his own party even, really. And now he's gone. So we have a big struggle ahead of us here in the UK.
So
the UK society, the Scottish society made such kind of options or choices. That is one progress. And I sincerely hope that such kind of excitement or movement will spread to the rest of the UK. And also one of the recommendations from the Mr. Akiba included the following. For example, is it possible to lift the hair trigger system? And even only with that, we can reduce the risks. And also no first use declaration is another one. So China, and we have been negotiating. And they say that they declare the non-first use policy. And then if the US declare non-first use, then that will make a great progress. That would be 2 or 3 steps forward. And now we'd like to ask Kevin-san. In the United States, how much progress has been seen? How much progress on this discussion has been seen, as though there was some active discussion under the Obama administration, but what is the current status?
It's a very mixed situation, as is often the case on these types of policies. So, President Biden probably knows nuclear weapons issues better than any other president ever. He was in the Senate for a long time. He was the chair of the Foreign Relations Committee. He was the vice president for 8 years. And Mayor Akiba talked about that during the Obama administration, when Biden was vice president, they were seriously considering a no first use policy, and the opposition of the Japanese government at the time is cited as one of the reasons why they didn't do it. At the same time, very high levels in the US government were considering not just a new first use policy, but the possibility of maybe getting rid of one leg of the triad, to use a word that CND uses, scrapping possibly the ICBM leg, the intercontinental ballistic missiles. So that was very serious and very high up in the government late in the Obama administration. So Biden knows all of that. And he made some good statements, both while he was vice president and also when he was running for president, about the only reason to have nuclear weapons is to deter a nuclear attack. He never exactly used the words no first use, I don't believe, but a lot of people thought that in this current nuclear posture review that's ongoing and that may be released very soon, that it might be possible that they would declare a no first use policy. I wouldn't bet a lot of money on that happening at this point. Biden obviously has so many other issues that he has to deal with domestically, and he's having problems even within his own party, unfortunately, with his domestic agenda. And there was the firing of a terrific woman who was a colleague of ours who was explicitly appointed in the Pentagon to lead the process of the nuclear posture review. She was fired, or they reorganized and got rid of her position. And most people think it was because she was too committed to changing US nuclear weapons policies. So I don't think that we're going to see major changes when this nuclear posture review comes out. The longer it's delayed, that might be better, because it might mean there's more room for the president and others around him to put their stamp on it. Otherwise, it's just going to be what the bureaucracy, the Dr. Strangeloves in the nuclear weapons establishment want, which is just to continue, with the nuclear upgrade. But on this particular issue of no first use, I think Mayor Akiba is right that China hasn't gotten enough credit for that policy, which has been for decades now. And so if we go forward looking at things like webinars or educational materials on deterrence theory, raising up that issue that China has had a no first use policy for so long, and that the other nuclear weapons states should declare that as well. I don't think that should take 10 years, as the mayor was talking about, but then, there's a lot of resistance to change, obviously, on all of these policies.
Thank you very much. And Dave-san, you raise your hand, so could you please, Dave-san?
Yes, thank you. Just to say that here in the UK, it's quite surprising. A lot of people think that the UK already has a no first use policy. Of course, it doesn't. But I think they believe that we wouldn't do that sort of thing. So it must be our policy. But if you talk to the people in government, so a previous defense minister, in fact, previous Labour Party defense minister, said that it would not be possible for the UK to have a no first use policy because we're part of NATO, and NATO does not have a no first use policy. So it may be that we have to change the policy of NATO, which is not impossible, of course. And in fact, if another survey in the UK suggests that most people would support that, a NATO with a no first use policy. So it would be popular, but whether it would be desirable amongst the politicians is another matter, or amongst NATO certainly. So just to point that out. Thank you.
ありがとうございます。
Thank you.
オバマ政権が先制
So the Obama administration was trying to adopt the no first use policy. According to the report, it was the Japanese government who was the greatest impedance to that process. And then Nakamura-san has talked with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And in your communications with the ministry, what is your impression of the ministry? What is your impression?
Thank you. Maybe before my answer, Mr. Kevin.
It's okay, go
It's
ahead.
okay. Okay. So yes, actually, I have submit the proposal to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs directly last year. But actually, I wasn't able to receive the exact response that I wanted from him. As Japanese government said before, he said that they say that they share the goal to abolish nuclear weapons. But TPNW is not a solution which Japan support because it divide the nuclear states and non-nuclear weapon states. And so that's the reason why Japan cannot support it. But you know, I've started to following the Ministry of Foreign Affairs answer for like 2 or 3 years, but for this whole year, the answer never changes, which I demand to the government and ministry in the proposal. I wanted them to explain fully and respectfully and recognize the treaty, but they never do it.
So if I may, the point that I was going to make, it was picking up somewhat on what Dave just said, in terms of people's public ignorance, which is very dangerous. The fact that most people in the UK think that there's already a no first use policy could be a good thing. And it does seem like logical that people would think, oh, the UK would never do that for various reasons. But in terms of the overall ignorance of nuclear weapons, it is very dangerous. A few years ago in the United States, there was a poll just asking people, how many nuclear weapons does the United States have? And the answer that came back, most people thought that the United States had between 300 and 400 nuclear weapons. Now, that would be true if that poll was in France, but not in the United States, right? That's how ignorant people are of nuclear weapons issues, just to begin with. And that's our tax dollars obviously are paying for the United States to have thousands of nuclear weapons, not 300 or 400. But to get back to one of the things that Mayor Akiba was talking about in terms of Northeast Asia nuclear weapons free zone, and this is somewhat connecting the dots. Again, if we could achieve a breakthrough with the negative security assurances and with a Northeast Asia nuclear weapons free zone, that does help make the point about no first use or limiting the sole authority of an executive to launch a nuclear war. So it's a great way to sort of build out global issues while you're also solving a very serious regional security problem.
ありがとうございます。
Thank you very much. As we are running out of time, I guess, so we will have to conclude. And this declaration of the non-nuclear free zone, the Akiba-san expects China to play a leadership role. And we too, and we have been having communications with the China Peace and Disarmament Council, and the UK, Australia, and the US is now working on OX. And of course, and this Chinese council is adamantly opposed to it because it's contrary to disarmament. However, the Japanese government, and when we asked the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, that they said that the Chinese position cannot be trusted, and Japan, they say that the Japan is at the forefront of the free and open Indo-Pacific, and so is the UK. So, as Akiba-san says, how can we make China a leader in this field? And if you could share with us your thoughts so that I can understand.
Difficult question, but first of all, it is it is an educational process. The Japanese public, to a large extent, are brainwashed to, well, not exactly hate, but certainly dislike China and Korea, and especially North Korea. And that kind of brainwashing must stop at some point. And I guess the progressive or the left wing of politics, well, let me use left wing loosely for the lack of a better word, has not been doing a very good job of correcting it and also educating it. It's okay. It's true that the Japanese role in the 15-year war or Pacific War, World War II, that the responsibility is grave, but we cannot simply sweep everything under the brush of responsibility and change the course of the public opinion going in the right direction. We need a massive sort of amount of education that must be done on all fronts, and that is the difficult part. And somebody really has to be the leader in initiating even one part of the educational program within the nation and the world. Education, for example, includes educating the foreign ministry officials, educating the politicians, educating the bureaucrats of political parties, and commentators and the media people and everyone. And that's a massive work. So massive number of people will have to be involved. And I believe that there are enough, people within Japan who could actually be part of this, bigger wave that would change the course that this country is headed. And actually, I think that I believe that comes from local governments, cities, villages, and towns, because that's where the real politics and the real people meet. For example, garbage collection is something that these basic towns, villages, and cities must do, but not the national government. National government so really do not understand, do not know how people live. And so the local governments, cities and towns and villages, that's where all these efforts must start. And I believe that Scotland is a very good example. I think it has had very good local government system. And actually, the nuclear weapon-free municipality movement started in England. I believe it was Manchester. The UK really has a tradition of sort of tying the politics, the hard world of politics to everyday life of people, and that's what I really would like to advocate. And on the city-to-city level, for example, sister city relationships are very, very important. And for example, Hiroshima and Chongqing are sister cities, and we share many things in common. Chongqing was bombed by the Japanese military, I guess, in the 1920s, and that damage was very heavy, and it was the capital of China for some time. Hiroshima was bombed, of course, by the A-bomb, and Hiroshima was the capital of Japan for a brief period of time. So we have many things in common, but Chongqing and Hiroshima became sister cities, and our common goal is never to repeat what happened to these cities, not really to sort of antagonize each other based on the past differences of history. So, and also Korean city, Daegu is a sister city of Hiroshima, and we had really great relationship with Daegu. And whenever there was a crisis between Korea and Japan, I used to call Mayor Kim, or Mayor Kim used to call me, and we talked with each other. And when the situation gets really worse, why don't we get into the front scene and advocate that we as sister cities do not want the escalation of sort of hate-mongering speeches and everything else between the two countries. We never had to do it. The situation got somewhat calmer after a while, so we never got to do it. But we are ready to sort of come into the scene and play the role of sort of arbitrator between the two sort of extreme factions in both countries. So anyway, city to city is important, and the cities really need to be the starting point of cleaning up the dirty politics that we all are facing.
So I like your mention of garbage collection, and maybe that is something that can be talked about at the local level, that we need to clean up the Cold War garbage or the nuclear garbage. Well, I like it.
Okay, great. I agree. By the way, Hiroshima is the second cleanest city in Japan, in that the per person per day amount of garbage produced is the second lowest in the among the Japanese cities.
Can I just add something? I think you are absolutely right about the city-to-city communication, but I think also citizen-to-citizen is also important. And we are fed with this propaganda of fear of the Chinese and of the Russians too. And it would be really a good idea to kind of get people to visit these countries and to meet people there and see that they are people, they're just people, and they don't want war any more than we do. So just to understand that they're no different from us, that will help too, I think, people to recognize the humanity of the situation and so on. So the more people that can do that, the better. And we should welcome people here too, from China, from Russia. The government is not too keen on this, however, so we have to overcome a few things, but I agree with the sentiment, certainly.
I've been to both China and Russia, and the people are beautiful there, and they're no different than anywhere else.
Right. Yeah, me too.
ありがとうございました。時間も
Thank you very much.
時間にもだんだん近づいてきましたので、
So we are getting closer to the end of this symposium, so we have to wrap up. So now we are talking about the nuclear weapon free zone. So the city-to-city engagement or the relationship and the city-to-city relationship or nuclear weapon free zone that was mentioned by Mr. Akiba, and also no first use declaration was also mentioned, and this will have a significant importance on the nuclear weapon free zone, and this should be built up. And on top of that, so it has been 1 year since the TPNW came into effect. So immediately after the TPNW came into effect, we had this kind of symposium. So Ms. Nakamura said that 50% of the parliamentarians should think that Japan should attend as an observer. And among the ruling party, Komeito party thinks that we should participate as an observer. However, the same initiative is not taken by LDP. And Germany, who is under the nuclear umbrella, declared to participate as an observer. So thinking all about this, so now that the world affair is disrupted with Mr. Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin and Mr. Boris Johnson from the UK, etc. But the what kind of activity is necessary from GENSUIKIN? So all of this, could you please give us your concluding remarks for 3 minutes? So I do like to ask everyone to give us a concluding remarks for 3 minutes. Well, in the reverse order, so the Akiba-san was the last speaker. So could you start, Nakamura-san? Nakamura-san, David-san, Kevin-san, and then finally Akiba-san in this order. Nakamura-san, over to you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for having me here today again. It was very pleasure and hope for me to know the action in US and UA as well. I express my respect to Mr. Kevin, Mr. Dave, and Mr. Akiba for what you have done up until now. Yes, and for the, I don't know, it's the exact answer, but for the question, Mr. Fujimoto said, is that I want all leaders in the world to visit Hiroshima and Nagasaki. As Mr. Dave said, like citizen to citizen, we can recognize that there are so beautiful people in the world, and we can also recognize how important to save those beautiful people and town and everything there. So lastly, I would like to share that my grandmother were the victim of the atomic bomb and have had a hard experience for her entire life. And still, a lot of Hibakusha is suffering from the atomic bomb attack. I do not want to repeat this forever. Yes, yeah, let's move on together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. David Webb, please.
Yes, thank you. You're quite right about beautiful people around the world. And in fact, one of the things that's kept me going in the peace movement for such a long time is that you meet such amazing people, such wonderful people from all different countries. And that includes Russia and China as well. There are people working there for peace too, of course. I think it's the nuclear weapon-free zone is a very important issue. We're trying to get that going in Europe again, as Mr. Akiba pointed out. We're working on that, trying to gain support. I think one of the ways in which we might break through with the TPNW are the nuclear hosting states in Europe, those countries that don't have their own nuclear weapons, but they host American ones. And there's more and more encouragement in seeing the people are not really happy with that situation in those countries. And there's every chance, I think, that one or two of those countries may well either visit the TPNW or even eventually sign up with a bit more pressure. So that would be very exciting. And we also have Norway. I think they're going to be going to the first meeting of the party states. So maybe there's a bit of momentum building here, which we can build on as well. I think the future is ours. It's going to be up to us. We have a lot of education to do, a lot of things to try to overcome in terms of propaganda and fear and hatred, etc., etc. But we have done it in the past, and we can do it if we all work together and work off our own experiences and just keep reminding people about what it is we're talking about. We're talking about the survival of the human race, perhaps of all life on the planet. So this is the most important issue that we could possibly be addressing. Thank you very much.
ありがとうございました。
Thank
それ
you.
からケビンから。
Next, Kevin, please.
First of all, I want to express my gratitude and admiration and thanks to GENSUIKIN. It's always wonderful to be with you virtually if we can't be together in person. Also great to see my friend Dave again. It's been a while. And lovely to hear the contributions of Ms. Nakamura. We need the voices of young people in our movement, very much. It's great for me because right now for peace action and here being in the United States, and I live just outside of Washington, it's a strange existence. I live in a beautiful neighborhood with diverse people, and just walking around my neighborhood, I meet the most wonderful people all the time. And yet the United States is, as Martin Luther King said, still the greatest purveyor of violence in the world. And I live just outside the Capitol. So we're thinking about not just nuclear weapons, but the Pentagon budget and the starvation in Afghanistan, which we're doing a webinar on tonight, and the horrible situation in Yemen, which the United States contributes to, and the Iran nuclear deal, and North Korea, and so many other manifestations of violence here in the United States, and also that we purvey around the world, unfortunately. So it's a treat for me to be able to get outside of that US bubble a little bit, talking about the possibilities of a Northeast Asia nuclear weapons free zone and how that would be great, not only for the region, but for the world. Also talking about Europe. And I'm someone that has Scottish heritage, so I'm very proud of the Scottish movement to get rid of nuclear weapons and for independence. And what Dave just mentioned, we didn't get into very much, but the United States nuclear weapons that are in 5 European countries, those should be gone tomorrow. They're absolutely unnecessary and provocative, and the people of those countries are right to abolish them. So I think what's been great about, as we're talking about all these very difficult policies, and nuclear weapons can be an intimidating issue for a lot of people, is to remember our humanity. And I wanted to just close with the words of Thich Nhat Hanh, who just left us very recently, one of my heroes in promoting peace and nonviolence. And he reminded us that peace is every step. So I hope we go forth in that attitude, because peace is indeed every step. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So lastly, Akiba-san, please.
I mentioned education, and education at every level is very, very important. And one of the things I was able to create while I was a Diet member was to create a yearly visit of foreign ministry officials, including the deputy minister, to Hiroshima to talk with the Hibakusha. I was able to do that because I was the #1 enemy of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs when I was in the Diet, and so we had heated discussions, but they respected my opinions as well, and so we were able to sort of cut the compromise, and they came to Hiroshima, although they are kind of sugar-coated, the purpose of the visit so that their ego wouldn't be hurt. But anyway, that lasted for about 10 years or so. But when I became mayor, they decided to discontinue the program. And as mayor, I didn't have the muscle to force them to continue. But educating the foreign ministry is another project that we'll have to tackle, and the Diet members can do that. And I think in addition to doing many other things, I believe that we should coach the Diet members, and so that their ego and the record of accomplishments would be bolstered, and so that they would become serious about pushing the cause of nuclear abolition. And for GENSUIKIN, as Kevin mentioned, maybe a webinar on deterrence theory, and also an international conference similar to the states parties meeting, but not on the abolition of nuclear weapons, but on no first use of nuclear weapons. The package can be a good sell because, for example, when you talk to that member and when he says that I am not for Japan participating in the party's meeting, then okay, you could argue that so you don't want to encourage the immediate abolition of nuclear weapons, but what about the lesser one? You certainly want the ultimate abolition of nuclear weapons, but in order to approach that, perhaps a weaker, just a closer, step toward that, but nearer to us, is no first use. It's not the abolition, but no first use. You could swallow that, couldn't you? And anyway, so milder version, and perhaps there is another sort of milder version we can concoct that could lead these hardcore deterrence theory enthusiasts to swallow and join our efforts at some level. So maybe GENSUIKIN could think in that direction as well. But anyway, no first use conference might be a worthwhile venture that you might think about.
ありがとうございました。少し減衰金も
Thank
で
you
すね
very much. So during the COVID-19, the GENSUIKIN is also struggling, but we will have to pursue what possibilities there are for us to do in the future. And thank you very much for your participation. And once the COVID-19 crisis is over, please come and visit Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We would like to invite you. And then we would like to have another very good session on how we can abolish nuclear weapons. At GENSUIKIN, and people in Hiroshima are also working very hard about how to erect the buildings from the bombings and so forth. And so there are a lot of activities going on in Hiroshima too. So thank you very much. Until very late at night for Akiba-san and Nakamura-san. It's past midnight in Japan. But I'm very pleased that we were able to have this seminar. And thank you very much. And I look forward to your cooperation in the future too. Thank you. Thank you.